Hi, Howard here, and welcome to this session, Creating Depth in Watercolour Landscapes. Got a couple of tips for you here about preparation. So just gather all your materials together before you start. Just check the list for what you need to have, particularly the palette, paints and water. Make sure that your palette and your water tub are very close together. I am right-handed myself, so obviously I keep everything to the right-hand side of my painting area. If you're left-handed, obviously do the opposite. The other thing is make sure you're painting with fresh paint. This is why I insist on tube paints. So have a look at the list of colours. Make sure that you squeeze out fresh paint for each colour. Have any preliminary sketches that you may have made yourself. Also, if the session included it, the photograph reference from the pack. So if you encounter any problems during the process, jot them down afterwards, pop them in an email to me, and I'll aim to get back to you with an answer within 24 to 48 hours. So, okay, the only last thing to consider really is submitting your finished work for the critique. So good luck and happy painting. Okay, so working from our photo today, the first thing I will say is, even if we're looking at the grid, which we should, the good old reliable grid. I know you won't see those pencil marks, folks. I haven't put them in very heavy. But two verticals, two horizontals. The first thing to note on this photo is that the water line, if you look at it, divides this scene 50-50. Or very nearly, it must be very close. So what that gives us a rather unfortunate composition: 50% background, 50% water or foreground, if you like. Well, 50% here, 50% there. So the first decision we need to make is, how do we want to adjust that? Do we want more of the background, less water, or do we want less background, more water? And I personally don't see much value from a painting where there's a large expanse of water. What is it? It's nothing. It's just a big sort of pale blue shape. So I would highly recommend that we bring that. If we're looking down down this lake here, this loch, we're looking to see the back edge of that loch about there, somewhere like that. So, if you're not comfortable putting horizontals, particularly if you're sat down painting, if you're not comfortable putting horizontals in like that, you use a straight edge, use a ruler. No, there's no crime in that. Even take a measurement if you really want to. Just sort of say, well, this is 4 inches here off this edge. This is 4 inches off here. It's only really just to get you get it in, like, because I'd rather see people use a straight edge than get that wrong and have that horrible thing we see often, is a wonky sort of eye line or horizontal. You've got to remember, water is the flattest thing on the planet. You've got to get that right. It's got to be a perfect horizontal. So there's going to be I've decided to bring it down, which will not only give us less water, okay, but it'll allow us to use perhaps a bit of cloud formation. It gives us a bit more space in the sky. So we can put in some bigger clouds above our heads here, and we can play that game of, remember what this session's all about? It's all about creating distance and depth, okay? So even the sky and the scale of the clouds can play their part in helping us with this, okay? So you'd have these big overhead shapes of clouds. You'd have slightly smaller as they disappear into the distance down here. So we'd be thinking about things like that. I know you can't see my pencil work, folks, but then I've got to keep it. These shapes will reveal themselves when I start painting. So let's get, what is that mountain range doing, the skyline doing back there? I might be happier if I started with the midground. So what we've got here is a really good example of foreground, midground, distance ground, back, furthest of all, is that mountain range at the back there. So we've got a nice succession of distances of depth. So yeah, I feel happier if I put in this bit of land that comes across here. Make a note of how it tapers down. So I will put this in a lot stronger so you can see the pencil work. Make a note of how that slither of land back there, where does it finish on the horizontal? It's certainly not in the middle. Don't come in from here and stop in the middle. It goes right over to this side, doesn't it? If you study that photo, okay. And there's a much closer, in fact, the closest land shape in this is a protrusion from the right-hand side here. Something like this. I'm going to make mine slightly bigger because in the photo it's cropped. Very slightly it's cropped. I mean, it's cropped too much. I'd rather see a bit more of it. Otherwise, too small a shape will just confuse. It looked like an accident. Looked like you couldn't really be bothered to do anything about that. So make sure you commit to that shape and show it off. Okay. This is very important to point out. There is a subtle, and I mean subtle, it must be no more than a millimeter or two. The point of this nearer shape is slightly lower on the flat of the water than it is there where it meets the distant bit of land. And I mean very subtle, but that is very important. Small a detail as it might appear, it's very important that we show that. Sometimes, I have seen sort of things go wrong. I check my own work and I think, oh, how did I manage to not see that? Where I've gone the other way with that. I'm just erasing some ugly, I've gone the other way with this, sorry, where that seems to be higher than that. Well, that's never going to happen because, it can't be lower back there than this bit of foreground up here. Okay. The water won't go from this level down to that level. Okay. It can only go as we see it from our eye line upwards in a very subtle fashion. Right, so we've got the long shape. This, albeit a fairly straightforward painting, does offer us a lot of things to consider. We could be considering in all our paintings, regardless of what the subject matter is. Things like shape making, we've been doing a lot on that lately, the importance of good shapes. And this, because we haven't got a lot to go on, the importance of good shapes in this is uppermost. Now then, there's another chunk of land, okay, that comes in about here somewhere, doesn't it? Shaped something like this. It moves, it's beyond this narrow slither here. It's a bit further back. And it comes down to about here somewhere. And I'm being careful again not to bring this into a middle position, not to finish this shape in the middle position. So I've stopped it more or less where it is in the photo, actually. So there's some shapes like this. Once you've got the main shapes in, then you can start saying, well, I know I haven't done the background mountain yet, but once you've got the main shapes in, then you can start thinking about, well, look at that row of trees, what looks like trees back there. It almost looks like the spine, the dorsal, those sort of dorsal shapes that you get on those prehistoric animals, stegosaurus or something like that. But the reason why I make that point is the observation thing is objects around us in the world are repeated. And if you recognize them to look something similar to something else, that's good, because it means you're reading the shape and you're aware of the shape. It might sound a bit odd that I'm referring to that row of trees and that bit of land like the back of a dinosaur, but associate shapes with other shapes. It'll help you convey them better. So here we are. There's a nice strong shape down here, and in between those shapes there's some lovely pale green like fields or land. You don't realize the scale of this until, and I hope you can all see this, that your photos are not cropped too much. Right over here, right at the edge, there's a little croft, a little building, and it's tiny. When you see that and the scale of that building, assuming it's an average size barn or small house or croft, as I say, a farm or something, you realize just how big this is, this area is. It looks absolutely tiny. And I think there's a hint of another little building around here. It's no bigger than a grain of rice on my paper, but that again is a little building back there. Right, let's put in this range, and it goes something like this. There's a peak that goes up here, something like that. At about the same height, there's a bit of disruption to that ridge. Goes off again here, up here, against there. I've penciled this in really hard, but I'd be very careful if I were you to go as bold with your pencil work. I will have to erase some of my pencil work. So there we are. There's the pencil, there's the drawing. Just clean up the pen, as I say, the pencil work a little bit. And we'll get some paints going. Okay. Starting with the 1-inch flat. This is both a flat, it's quite a useful brush actually. You know, in the past I've used strictly a flat brush for shape making, which is mostly synthetic, and then I've used a wash brush for the washes, strangely enough. But this, because I in the past I've always worked on a bigger piece of paper. This is quite a small piece of paper for me. I find that this brush here is a mix of synthetic and natural fiber. And at this scale, it acts as both a wash and a shape making brush. So quite useful. So it's a bit of a sort of dual purpose brush, if you like. Okay, I'm starting with a bit of cobalt blue here, but in that cobalt blue, I'm putting a tiny bit of that phthalo green. And I mean, be very careful with this phthalo green, okay? There's a colour about Scotland, about Scottish water, Scottish skies. It is, it carries a little bit of this transparent phthalo green, okay? So it's barely perceivable. I haven't pre-wetted the sky, okay? I'm just going in, I am going to go over that distant mountain actually, but in a, if you try a crisscross brush action for the over the mountain, try that, because by doing crisscross, it means you're ending up with little white pockets of white paper in some places, okay? And we can use those because there is some sort of evidence of snow back there. So I'm still working wet into wet, but it's drying off. The room that I'm working in here is quite warm. I've had my heating on in here for about the past hour and a half. You've got to take things like that into consideration. It does affect how quickly your paper is drying out. Okay, but as I say, I'm concerning myself with the sky for the moment. So this time a little bit more ultramarine blue, maybe a bit of cobalt blue with it, a little bit of burnt sienna again. So what I'm getting is ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt blue, and a little bit of this burnt sienna here. See how the burnt sienna darkens it immediately. But don't go mad with the burnt sienna. You don't want a really warm dark. You just want to make the blue slightly darker than it is. So again, I'm thinking of where these bigger overhead clouds are, right over our heads here. And then I'd like to put these an inference of smaller clouds back here in the distance, the clouds that may be, you know, around the same area as the mountain peaks back there. But that area is too wet. Watch what happens if I try to put a shape back there. It doesn't really register. It just disappears into the wet surface. But you can miss that opportunity in the blink of an eye if you're not careful. So keep an eye on it. In my room here, where it's quite warm, I think that should be ready. The smaller distant clouds could be ready to be applied in about the next 2 minutes. Maybe what I'll do in the meantime is I'll take some cobalt blue, some burnt sienna, okay, and at the base of this area here, I'll just infer a little bit of darkness, okay, and maybe a little bit of shape. You can go over these trees that are interrupting that line. A little bit bluer. If I had to describe this color, I'd sort of call it sort of indigo. And you might be sat there thinking, well, why don't you just use indigo? Because, well, I could, and on some occasions I will, but I'm here to try and encourage us to know what makes a color. And if we just take the shortcut every time and just say, well, it's indigo, I'll use a tube of indigo. There's dangers with that, is that we stop learning about what makes a particular color. And worse than that, actually, is that it encourages us to use a single color and leave it on a shape to dominate the entire shape. That just creates a flatness. If you make your indigo from ultramarine blue or cobalt blue and burnt sienna yourself, there's two colors. As long as you don't mix them together too much, as long as you avoid too vigorous brushwork, it'll always look like two colors rather than one. And two colors is always going to look better than just one. Two colors will prevent that area from looking flat. Right, sorry, I'm mixing as I speak here. I've just mixed up again a bit more of the cobalt and burnt sienna, and a little bit of ultramarine. It doesn't really. What we were saying earlier about blues, there are very few occasions where I would sort of say, oh, you know, you've got to use cobalt blue for this up here in the sky. You've got to use ultramarine blue up here. You get used to the temperature changes that each blue offers. It is a subtle thing, and it does take some time to learn. I appreciate that. You know, it's but in the absence of one of those colors, if I didn't have a cobalt blue, you would probably realize and learn quite quickly that, you know, okay, I haven't got cobalt blue, but what I have got is ultramarine blue. Now, what if I added a little bit of cerulean blue to that ultramarine blue? That would give me something very similar, not the same, not exactly the same, but very similar to cobalt blue. So sometimes comes down to how quickly we want to paint. Right, I mentioned those smaller, distant clouds, didn't I? Well, here we go. Back here, now they're sticking, you see. Now they're actually working there because it's that little bit drier because we're 3 minutes on from where we were earlier. Okay, so let's leave. I think that's enough. That's good enough for the sky. Not sure whether I like this pale area over here. But that could have just made a dreadful mistake by going back into an area that was drying off nicely then. That brush that I just applied was a little bit wet, but I've got if that does go a little bit odd, I've got answers for it later. Okay. Would we want to lift out now that we've got a sky with darks and lights, large shapes, small shapes, warm shapes, cool shapes? Would we, on top of that, want to lift out something? Well, why not? You know, let's put all our skills to use. Let's use as many things as we know we can do. So I've just wrung this brush out. I dunked it in the water tub, clean water, and then I rinsed it out quite vigorously. I rinsed it out quite hard with my thumb and forefinger. And that means I've got a thirsty, this might as well be a piece of sponge now. It's a thirsty brush. And I can say, let's just put a little bit of light maybe on top of one or two of these clouds up here. Okay, be gentle with this. You don't, this is quite a delicate operation. You just sort of circular movements that I'm using. And each time I've removed something, I'm back in my water tub to clean the brush. Don't go from here and sort of think, well, that's a good shape, and then go over there and do another shape, because what's happened is you've taken paint from here, still in the brush, only to make a mess over here, because it should be a clean, thirsty brush. That'll do for now. Okay. Now, let's have a look at, I want to go into that distant mountain range, but looking at the surface of my paper, and my paper is buckling, it's cockling, because I don't pre-stretch my paper. Okay, so we have to accommodate that. If you get time to stretch your paper, stretch it. Honestly, it's easier to work on. But if, like me, you know, you don't get time to do these things, then be patient, work around the problem. And my way of working around the problem is saying, well, you know, can't go back into that area at the moment because it's undulating, and there in the lower troughs, it's still very wet. In the upper peaks of this paper, where I'm pushing down here with my brush handle, it's very dry. It's amazing how it can be so dry here, but only for it to be very wet in the trough round here. So just allow for these things. Get to know the behavior of paint, water, and paper. So let's have a look at this mid-ground territory. Now, we know that there's a dark chunk, dark shape here where I'm circling with my brush handle, don't we? That's the darkest, one of the darkest areas. It's the biggest, darkest area in the mid-ground. It's not the darkest area in the painting. In fact, this is worth a note. Here's a side note. This bit of land over here to the right, I'm rethinking it already. I think it's too big. Okay. I still want it coming in at the way, because, you know, I said you've got to establish the fact that it's there. You don't want to hide it like it's an afterthought. Sorry, one thing is it's too big. Okay. So I'm going to reduce the height of it here from that to that, just there. And two, it's the darkest thing in the photo. If you look at it, if you squint your eyes, if you can't see that, squint your eyes and you'll see what I mean, and look at that photo. It's the darkest thing. That's no place for the darkest thing in your composition. Okay, whatever you do, don't make that little chunk of land there the darkest thing in your painting. We'll warm it up. We can warm it up, which will tell us that it's close to us. But not a dark warm. It'll be a mid-tone warm at best. So let's get a big wash in here. Now, I didn't really mean to do that. I actually put some water in there, so I'm sort of pre-wetting that. So there you go. One of us was asking, somebody was asking about, do I pre-wet? I think last week, and mostly I don't. But just to show you, if I were to do it, this is an occasion where I would do it. I've got the background in, and I've got a very defined shape. This is the value of making a good pencil drawing. Okay, your shapes stay there for the entire duration of the painting process. If you didn't make your shapes and establish your shapes early, you'd be floundering now, thinking, you know, what do I do with this paint? What do I do with this wash? So there it is. There's that shape, and I've used a bit of phthalo green, and a little bit of cadmium yellow. Very weak, okay? And I pre-wetted it. So I went in with water around the shape, as though I had paint in the brush, okay? Now, I've gone over my line here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull some of that down, because later that'll work quite nicely as a bit of a underlying reflection. So that was the phthalo green, very, very weak. This is very weak. And again, this is that thing, isn't it, where sometimes we have to change our paint strength on the fly. You know, on the fly. What I mean by that, of course, is very quickly during the process, from one strength of paint mix to the next. So I'm just bringing that down vertically. It's very important that you keep a good vertical brush mark. Don't go off to the right, don't go off to the left, whatever you do. Just keep, and again, if you're sat down, that's going to be tricky, okay, to do a good, the two hardest things to do if you're a sit-down painter, that's to do a good vertical and to do a good horizontal. And the reason why is because it calls for body movement, not just arm and wrist movement, okay? If you have back issues and you can't stand up to work, I suggest you put your paintings on more of an angle from you, up off the surface. So even an angle, you know, maybe, what is that, about 50 degrees, something like that, okay? And then push it across your table so it's almost at arm's length away from you. That'll make doing horizontals and verticals, if you sat down, a lot easier. Okay, right, okay. So I've put in this really sort of pale wash, but I'm hoping, if you're studying your photograph reference, I'm hoping you'll see the method, the reasoning for me putting that color on. The underlying value and color of this landmass here is this sort of color, okay? Slightly warmer in the photo, I've got to say. In the photo, that's a slightly more of an olive, pale olive. But this is purpose. I do this purposely. If I went straight in with an olive green straight out of the tubes, a bit like what I was saying about the indigo color earlier, that's it. We think, job done. You know, this is just an olive green, and I've got it. Look at that. I've got it spot on. It looks like just the same color as the green in my photo. What you haven't taken into account for is that we will need to put further colors into here when we start putting the trees in and things like that. That is going to affect your olive green and make it muddier, even warmer, darker, okay? So you start bright and light to ensure that by the end of your painting, you've still got some clean color, okay? Right, let's turn our attention for the moment to some small detail. I was hoping to catch this while that wash was still a little bit damp. I'm hoping it is still. Now, if it has gone dry in this room of mine here where I'm painting, too dry, then you can, if you're careful, use a spritzer and just spritz the area. But that is, trust me, that's more difficult than learning to paint quickly and catching each part stage at the optimum wetness and dampness level. So I mentioned those, that ridge of trees. I'm trying not to make them too regimented back there and trying to get the scale right. Don't put, I think my pencil marks for some of these trees were too big. So I'm just making adjustments as I put the paint in here. What color was this? This was ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, okay, for these little tree marks. Small brush with a good point. And then let's have a look at our painting. Our photograph. What does it actually do? There are clusters, there are groups of trees. don't regiment them, okay? Don't make them look like a line of soldiers all stood in rank. So bit more. Now, what I'm doing here is there's other landline vegetation, probably gorse bushes and things like that, and bracken maybe, but it's warmer. It's slightly warmer than some of those trees that are in the background. So I've just added a bit more burnt sienna. And watch how I make this shape. Forget the point of the brush, okay? They may be small shapes. It may be a small bit of detail, but I'm still avoiding using the point of the brush. I'd rather go belly side and make this shape. This brush is like that to the surface. There's such a minimum amount of angle there, okay? So the only way you can paint that way is by holding your brush in this very specific way. If you put your brush down on your tabletop, okay, like that, whoops, it's rolling off. So it's down on the flat. I grab it just behind the metal ferrule here, okay? And if I turn it around, nothing has moved. I'm not tempted to turn the brush at all. You can see the full length of the brush on this side, okay? The brain wants you to do that. As soon as you take your mind off the job, your brain wants you to hold that brush like a pen, because we do a lot more things with something like this in our hand to write with. We think of this like the brain goes into autopilot and says, twist it round, hold it like a pen. Void that, fight it off, fight that temptation, it's muscle memory thing, isn't it? So just put it down. If it happens to you, put it down again, pick it up, make sure that you can get the brush contact flat to the paper like this. Okay, now I'm going along the distant bank a little bit by the same method, okay? Just pulling this flat brush. And I'm referring to this as working off the belly of the brush, not the point. There are times, obviously, when I use the point of the brush. Imagine if we were putting, well, you saw me do it a little bit on the trees back there. That was more or less the point of the brush. But moreover, we would do that when we're painting windows and buildings and things like that. We would use the point of the brush a little bit more then. But even then, I still try to use the belly of the brush more. It does separate the amateur from the professional a bit. We were always taught to sort of paint like this, like the brush was a pen in our hand, and rely only on the point of the brush. Okay, the brush offers a lot more from the belly. All right, so I'm just zipping across this edge here. Now that I've got that edge for this, I think I'll deal with this shape. Belly of the brush again. I'm picking up something that's already mixed on my palette. It's really a weaker version of what I just put on here. Put a bit more, quite a bit of water, okay, but a fair bit of burnt sienna. So when that dries off, it might look quite dark to you on your screen, but trust me, there's a lot of water in that, and give it only 5 minutes or so, and that will look a lot paler. If I did want it to be a bit darker, I can go back into it later. But the way maybe to think about this now and to bring this to your attention is I've sort of sectioned things like this. I thought this is the sky. The sky is included a furthest background in the wash. Then I moved into the midground, took the opportunity to get some reflection when I was painting the midground, okay, by the vertical reflections. And then only then do I start looking at suggesting some detail. Now, there's a few other things going on here. So forgive me if I go a little bit quiet. I'm just going to try and emulate what's going on in the scene. I'm only really repeating what I've already done. The odd little mark here and there, not really considered. Oh, by the way, I did mention this little building, didn't I? Right over to the left. Whatever you do, don't put that in, because if you can see it at the end of it, you wish you hadn't put it in, because it'd be a total distraction in the wrong place. Okay, but if I could get that, if I go over this landmass here later, and I can get a hint of a little building back there, then I will. Look at that. I've just sort of there we go. This is the odd occasion where I use the point of the brush. I've left this little negative shape here, tiny little shape that we can infer that little farm croft building down there is neighboring, and we can make a little bit more of that hopefully before the end of the painting. So I can in my fashion, in the way I paint, I mentioned about how I like to keep colors clean in the initial stages, but that's also because I know that I will be looking at probably putting another wash in here, probably just water or a very weak shadow later. So now then, focal point territory. I've almost assigned this to sort of I've assigned this to an area of my brain where, oh, of course, yeah, we're not going to forget that. We never forget the focal point. But I've also got to be aware that I should be pointing it out to you folks. I'm looking at this area here as my focal point territory. Okay. So where are we? Sky looks okay. I'm fairly happy with that. Nothing in the mountain as such yet. Okay, other than a slight darkening at the foothills just behind here. Okay, that was done at the same time as the sky and the clouds. I'm squinting my eyes and realizing that this area is still to go dark and shape. So what am I saying to myself here? How do we make this look interesting? Okay, you've got some good shapes in there at the moment. And sorry, I'm playing as I speak here. Put a little bit of cadmium yellow in the top of this little near area here, so it doesn't darken it, but it does spice it up a little bit. Sorry. So back to where I was a second ago. I'm at this stage and I'm saying, what is the next move? And I think I'm definitely going to leave the water in here till last, unless I've got a mix on the go and for some reason I have to pick up the large brush again, and then I might do that. But I'll pre-warn you if that's the case. Yeah, I think it's still, I think there's still value in working in the midground as I look at it. Okay. So what do I do? What is required in that area? I think I've got to put down this little brush, okay? Because what I'm looking at now is slightly bigger shapes to what I've just been doing. I've got a little drop of water there I'll get rid of. So why don't we pick up, I put on the list a large round brush, didn't I? And really that's there as an option. I've got this whopping great round brush that often I will do everything I've done so far with this brush. It's really personal choice, folks. It's all I would recommend to everyone is this. Every time you buy a brush, okay, use it only for as long as you feel comfortable with. Get to know it. Don't be flitting from this brush for this painting to to that brush. So I mean, by all means, put a couple of pieces of paper out and do one with a flat brush sky. Okay, next one with the round brush sky. You might get an instant idea as to what you're most comfortable with by doing that. Alternatively, what I probably recommend is more a case of sticking with one brush for your next 6 paintings, okay? And then after that, trying the other new brush that you bought, completely different. One's flat, one's round, and try doing the same thing. It's important that you try doing exactly the same thing with that different brush, with the other brush. And you will find that you favor. I've always been a little bit of an eclectic. I've always had this sort of slightly eclectic approach to my method. I enjoy keeping myself on my toes by swapping and changing. But I did, my caveat is this, I qualify that by saying, I did do what I've just said. I can remember working with one brush for a long time. And over time, that enabled me to get familiar with all types of brushes. So I know the difficulty is sometimes just getting time to do all these things, but if you can be a little bit organized and say, well, look, I've got an hour and a half on Thursday morning or whatever, why don't I be a little focused and do that thing? Let's paint to see if we can get 2 quick paintings done with that flat brush. Anyway, back to the job in hand. So I'm plumbing for the flat brush again. I've used it throughout and I'm going to stick with it. So, but what am I doing with it? I'm picking up some burnt sienna. Okay. Now, let me just show you. I'll have to show you my palette here. I just said I'm picking up some burnt sienna, okay? But before I picked it up and put it in this little square well, there was already evidence, some residue of what I've been using so far, in mostly the blue of the sky in the background. So I didn't mind that at all, because the last thing I want this to be at this distance is a bright orangey brown red color from the burnt sienna. So a little bit of that dulling down from the blue has worked quite nicely. So, but as I said again earlier, I want this almost to be water-like. It's so weak. So let's run through here. Maybe near this nearer edge, partially up the slope here, we'll put this slightly warmer color in. Okay, so what we're doing here is saying it's really only some upper areas of this slope that are being left with the original limey green wash. Much the same for this territory here. It's almost it's a swipe of the brush, allowing the color to hit and miss over the surface. But remember this area here, I quite like it. I like the fact that this area here is quite dark where my index finger is. So I'm picking up the same colors that I was just using, the burnt sienna, okay, and the ultramarine blue. And I'm mixing this so that probably the blue has the upper hand ever so slightly. If you're trying to decipher this color exactly, you would probably, I hope, say, seems as though, you know, Howard has used a bit more of the blue than the burnt sienna in that mix. So, and I'm also just picking up, for good measure, a little bit of the phthalo green. So let's have a look. I don't know whether it's going to work. Honestly, I don't. That's the honest truth until I apply it. I've mixed it and I do a test shot here. Is it the right color temperature? Is it the right strength? And if it wasn't, if I thought that was way too dark, you've got to go a bit darker, remember, because it will dry out lighter. But if it was way too dark, I'd be straight in here with a clean tissue and lifting it out. I've got some drifting going on here because maybe I should have let that dry before this went in, but I think that's okay. That's no big issue at all. There's also a little bit of delineation to this line up here. Let's finish what I was doing down here in this shape. So it's got quite a nice line to it. Look, it has a sort of almost like a whale head here on this side. And I've left a little slither of light there just to make it a little bit more interesting again. So do you think, you know, as you look at this with me, folks, do you think that maybe, you know, this area is it's not cohesive to the colors because it's a lot warmer. There's actually a lot of red in here. I haven't used any red. Well, I have in the guise of burnt sienna. The burnt sienna in this sense is my red, okay, because it has quite a bit of red in it, but it looks very red compared to the greens behind. So why don't we just say, for this to work now, we've got to bring a little bit of that color down here, just to make the whole thing work together. And I'm just, again, manipulating. These are the subtle nuances of things going on in the distance there. This brush hasn't got much paint in it, but it does allow me to add a few further shapes here. I think this is okay. Try to make that slightly less interesting now. Right. Okay. Let's get to the mountain in the background. And the mountain, now that it's dry, why have I left it till now to do the mountain? Because it was too wet, if you remember. We've worked the wet into wet stage, and we've created our sort of cloudy area up here overhead, created a couple of distant clouds further back there. But to enable us, we do need a good edge, you see, to this shape back here. And that's not going to happen if I'd have worked into this any earlier, because it would have been too soft. So let's mix up the ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna have been used a lot in this painting. So strength-wise, it can't be too dark, remember. Although, you know, the photo suggests that it is, the photo can suggest what it likes. Yeah, what's got to happen is you've got to have your painting balance, in balance. So let's go for some of the darkest shapes first. I'll make, the beauty of this brush again. It not only acts as a good wash brush, but it also is a good shape maker. So let's say we'll come into this side here. We can imagine some ridges up here, but get this line good first. My concern is only about the edge against the sky line, okay? And this is where I like to work with two brushes. So I just picked up a round brush, because I don't want to come down to as hard an edge as it appears in the photo. I'd rather soften that, let it diminish there in a much more subtle fashion, okay? It seems to be some sort of ridge in this direction. I'm only really guessing this. I can't be sure at this distance, but if I didn't make some effort, it would just be a flat shape back there. So all the time just using burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Now if I squeeze the paint out of this brush and just pull some of the pigment over these areas, we can get a suggestion of snow up here. Just a bit. Doesn't have to be as much as what's in the photo, or it could be more if you wanted it to. But don't worry about it not looking exactly the same as the photo. 5 minutes after, if I'd have taken another photo and, you know, cloud may have come down and obscured this scene, you'd have a completely different scene. I'm going to do this a lot quicker now, folks, because I can't work this type of thing slowly. It gives me too much time to think about it, and that's fatal for me. It just doesn't work for me. Have to paint these shapes rapidly and keep them fresh. Okay, in here, along there, another shape, something like that. Just get that little bit of cobalt blue that's stuck on the paper there from a previous wash. That's okay. Take this round brush again now, land the brush here and just tease into the pigment that's up here. Might be the opportunity here for another hint of snow, just about there. But land the brush here, tease into that pigment, and you get a nice soft transition of what's going on the side of the mountain to what's actually going on at the ground level or near the lower areas. Does this need anything more? Will it settle as it is really well? You know, will it look good if I let it settle and do its thing? Just checking. Could just warm it up a tad, you know, a little bit, about here somewhere. There certainly seems to be some warmth on that territory there, as though the sun is actually finding its way onto the mountain slopes, the lower areas anyway. And now I'm going to I think I'm going to have to let that dry actually, because I will be weighing it up, that area, in a moment as to whether I need to put just a tiny bit more inferred detail in there. So let's try and finish this painting. We're not far off. And I'm going to put the the water in now. So I'm picking up cobalt blue. More or less, when you think about it, it's got to be a reflection of the sky, hasn't it? That's all water is on a day with even a small amount of light around. The water is going to be a reflection. Let's just try some practice shots. This, for me, I've got to do this stood up. And the safest place to try this out is somewhere down here. So if you're not comfortable with this, doing this with a, you count your brush strokes. Once you start, I'm right-handed, so I work from left to right. Don't stop midships. Don't stop here. Don't stop there. Even if the brush has run out of paint, continue the movement right off the edge of the opposite side. Okay. So, but I'm going to start down here because if I don't like it, I can take it off. That's okay. I'll come back the other way from right to left. You don't have to, you can do all left to right, left to right. It's up to you. But sometimes you get a slightly different delivery. So the speed and light touch of this means that you get this broken effect, this broken brackish water here. But I'm now going to put in here a couple of, let me just sort of get that right at the top. So I'm just taking some of the water out of the brush there, continuing up to there, up to the distant landline back there. Now then, this is another opportunity to just to put the odd vertical in. Be very, very delicate here. It's almost like you're dusting off a delicate piece of furniture. Just dust it downwards like this. And in this foreground now, same brush, same big brush, ultramarine blue again, and burnt sienna. And we have this evidence of just seaweed just breaking the surface here. Just about here. Bigger here. Some bigger, bolder, longer marks. That's whatever you do. That's an area to get too engrossed in. They're just a couple of dark horizontal marks with burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Right. Let's look at finishing this painting. And I mentioned a moment ago that I was wondering whether, parts, particularly here where there's some evidence of snow on the mountain, I was wondering whether we could just lift that a little further. Have to be really careful here. Part of me is sort of saying, don't be a fool, leave it as it is. It looks fine. But I'm driven constantly by the what if, and I've made a lot of very bad paintings as a result, but it won't stop me. That's the only way forward as I see it, is just to say, it's just water paint and paper. Don't get precious about it. Try something that'll teach you something new all the time. In every painting, that's the honest truth. I in every painting, in fact, I feel quite disappointed sometimes if I've gone through a painting and I thought, well, what did I learn there? Nothing. So, and it's probably because I didn't take any risks. Probably because I got to the point and I chickened out. I just got a bit precious. So I'm just looking at, now I'm in that territory where this can't be taught. This is just, will that look good if I do this? If I were to infer some little subtle ground undulations over there, would that look good, or won't it? Not that impressed with it, if I'm honest. So I'm taking it off with the tissue, but it's left enough inference. Even having taken it off with the tissue, it looks better. It does look better. Were those slightly dark marks up there too dark? I think I should just say, right, let's put this one away. This is fine. Easier said than done, as I'm mixing up another color here. So let me just, can we lift the focal point territory? Of course we can. I've just picked up the small round brush, and this is a glue-like mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine. Remember, we said we thought we'd make this area here the focal point territory. Right, easy. We take this the darkest mix of all, as you know, yet. It's the darkest mix. Nothing else on this painting so far has been this dark. It's like that glue-like mix of that we use quite regularly, and just placing it, making a couple of those little trees, etc., slightly darker, or rather considerably darker, I suppose, than the other areas in this painting. Could come in here. We can come out a little bit from here in the odd place, but remember, the further you move away from the focal point territory, the less of this special dark detail you apply. Okay, so, and that's more or less it. I'm going to, if we put something slightly dark, I wonder if we can show off that little building back there a little bit better. Now then, this is honestly optional, folks, to you at this stage. As this painting stands, it's a finished painting. It's acceptable. Okay, I'll put the mount around it just to show you what it looks like before I do what I have to do to feel like, you know, I can improve on this painting. Let me just get the mount. So there it is as it stands. Okay. So quite happy with it. Don't think I've got enough of the ultramarine blue in the water. So it's not, there's a little bit of discord there. Okay. So I probably need to put a bit more ultramarine blue in the water so that it's more cohesive from top to bottom. But the other thing is, I'm just going to put a bit of shadow across some of that mid territory. So with no further ado, it's about the only time you'll see me clean my palette is because I want this color to be quite clean. So I just spritzed my mixing well here. Let's get that out of the way. Not sure what that's doing there. So just clean up that. And I'll pick up some ultramarine blue. As I say, quite weak. But I want this to serve as something that'll allow me to pull the sky color a little bit more into this territory here. It doesn't have to be a carbon copy, or a mirror copy of what's going on in the sky. It's just a case of bringing the color as much as anything down into that territory. Okay, leave that like that. Now, with even more water in this mix, I am going to suggest the little bit of shadow. Okay. Now, as I say, if you're at this stage with yours, there's nothing wrong with dipping out of doing this bit, but I do like painting light, and you can only paint light by painting shadow. So I'm going to say that area there's a cloud. The clouds up here throwing shadow like something like this over here down this slope. Okay, probably into here, to be fair. This is the area that I want to be clever up with. I don't want to obliterate that, that's for sure. What I can do is say, well, this area here shadowed out, and striations down here maybe. And there we are. I'm going to leave it like that. Just a delicate vertical here and there again. Very delicate. And that edge back there, just teasing it off because I don't think it would be quite such a hard line on that shadow as I've got. There we are. You know, this is the point. Can I tick all the boxes? Did I establish my focal point? Well, if I didn't, let's just put an extra bit of dark there, here. I think I'm relatively happy with that.